Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, Aston Villa are close to wrapping up their first signing of the window. But what do we think of Borussia Dortmund forward Donyell Malen? Then there's a Bundesliga forward tearing it up who's linked to Tottenham, Liverpool, Arsenal and Manchester City, plus a centre-back on his way to bolster Pep Guardiola's defensive ranks. And of course, we look at Ben Doak, linked to Ipswich and Palace, but could he be an option for Liverpool in the long term? That's all on today's episode. So we're back for another episode, Transfer Window in full effect. I'm joined by Ted Knutson. Ted, we're going to touch on the weekend a little bit, but really, transfer season is upon us and we have to do it.
I think it's funny that we've grown a ton, both on the newsletter side and on the podcast side. And in the time that we've grown the most, we haven't really had transfer season. So despite the fact that we are the Transfer Flow, and that was what we were founded on, and we're pretty good at it, to be honest. Most people know us for our team analysis, maybe a bit of the gambling side, and then a lot of game analysis too. So feels like we're going to bring that front and center for the rest of this month, and we will sort of give you the goods, the popcorn that you've been longing for.
And I think it should be a good window. You know, like normally the January window is kind of boring, but this January window, I think, does.
Who are you? This level of optimism from you about a window that's always terrible. It's always fucking awful. People are like, oh, it's going to be a great January. Everybody needs players. And then suddenly, like, you're the one that's spinning the silver lining. What's going on here?
Look, Ted, I've got a coffee in front of me. I've taken my B12. So I'm absolutely rolling right now. I don't know. Look, there are loads of teams with loads of needs. The league is all over the place. The Champions League is kind of wide open. It feels like an opportunity for a team to grab control of something with one or two judicious transfers. And one of the biggest names going round is Omar Marmoush, who we've touched on a little bit, but it felt like we had to talk about him properly because he's been heavily linked to Liverpool, to Arsenal, to Tottenham, who almost got a deal done for him before. I think you mentioned that last week. And Manchester City. Manchester City are reportedly the front runners, but reported by the English press. So, who knows? Omar Marmoush, he's been in Germany since he was 18, but he is Egyptian. He turns 26 next month. He's at Frankfurt. Frankfurt have been having a good season, though not lately. I think they've got 4 losses in their last 5. What do you think of the player, first of all? Because there are all sorts of questions around him.
So I thought this because we had Egyptian info, and also Mito seemed to believe it as well. So it's funny, like there's a player, for those of you who are young children, there's a player who used to be very, very good for a brief period of time. His name is Mito. He played for Middlesbrough and also for Spurs. And then he aged pretty rapidly. I think he enjoyed life quite a bit as an elite career footballer, as many people do. And he is he's connected to the Egyptian moves. And so historically, he's been quite in the know on this stuff, even though people are like, ha, Mito. And so definitely thought that he was going to Spurs this summer. It looked like that was a very likely thing. I don't know if the price was a holdup or not. I think the thing when we were looking at him, and this is kind of an open question, especially like where he's going to go and what position he's going to play, is the most complicated thing to answer. Now, in terms of skill set, the things that are truly interesting here are, one, he's real fast. And real fast and pretty good on the ball is a nice combination of stuff, and certainly a high need that many teams have right now. Last season, what did he have? He had 10 goals, basically on target for his expected goals. This year, we're looking at 11 on 6, but a decent number of through balls from both sides. He's kind of like a small second striker in a way. Yeah. Like if you were playing like a 3-5-2, and you had, one guy that was pacey and another guy that was a little bit more useful for being able to bounce the ball off and stuff like that. That's probably what you're looking at. I don't think he's a pure wide forward. So the question then becomes, like, when you're kind of trying to imagine this deal in whole, like Spurs had a lot of needs, and Spurs especially were looking for, a potential real forward that would be able to give them pace. They end up with Solanke, who's been excellent, to be honest with you. I think Solanke is one of the few things this year that has not been in question for Spurs. Marmoush has some flexibility in that he can play sort of wide or tucked as a bit of the time, but you're not going to get the pure sort of like elite dribbler that a lot of these teams are looking for that helps you move the ball through zones. You're more like a Nicholas Jackson type, but again, like not in the same sort of shape, in that like you can give him through balls, he will run onto them. He can get you into space all the time because like he's faster than anybody in somebody's back line.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, when you look at the player, some of these clubs immediately, to me, seem kind of ridiculous. I don't really see how this makes sense for Liverpool, except that they were like, there's maybe one Egyptian going out. Let's bring one more. Which, honestly, I mean, like that is genuinely how the English press think.
This is literally why we started the transfer flow, right? Like we wanted to combat the group think and the horrible like dumb assumptions that are made around the English press. Traditional, not in specific. We're not like bagging on anybody in particular, but the traditional English press and how often they are conclusively dumb in weird ways around football transfers.
We should introduce a Patreon tier though, where we do specifically bag on individual people, because I have loads of people who I actually hate. But I mean, like, he doesn't really make sense to me there, because like, yeah, when you're talking about him, like, what does he excel at as a foot? Like, his shots have really popped. Like last year they were at 3 shots per 90. Now he's at 4.4. His XG per shot is like a shade under average. But like it's not bad or anything. It's just like totally fine. And I don't know. I just kind of think if you want a forward who runs in behind and gets shots, there is actually one of those at Liverpool who you could choose to use.
His creative numbers are really good too. I don't know if you know this, but like this year especially, he's sort of like bumped doubled, up the open play expected goals assisted. One of my weird questions is like, why wasn't he playing a lot more at Wolfsburg? Well, what did you guys do? Like, why did you just sit this guy and barely use him? So yeah, I mean, he looks great right now. As we talked about in an earlier podcast, one of the big questions though is first of all price based off of his current age, right? So he's a February birthday, so he turned 26 in a month's time, and how do you find a deal that makes sense for everybody where he's important for Frankfurt and they're trying to get to the Champions League, but also like teams know that he might be slightly post peak. So they want to like a little bit of caution. You can't pay like over the odds for it. And we'll talk in just a bit about the transfer market currently and the transfer market in the summer more broadly, about some of the complexity that teams are dealing with from some inside discussions as well.
It's an interesting one with his age though, because he is 26 soon, but he's got under 100 career league 90s. So, you know, I guess you could theoretically say like, oh, maybe he'll peak a little bit later. I wonder, is there a future, do you think, where players try and get their physical data like made public so that they could potentially provide it to a buyer in this kind of situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they own that. So to be completely explicit, they own it. They would probably have to sign a legal waiver for any sort of press that carries that because of the GDPR elements of it. Like if you have someone's physical data, like the physical data, at least through a lot of their own stuff that they would track, the stuff that's done through broadcast tracking is a different element to it. But if you have it and you want to release it, like you could, it'll be interesting. Like that's an area of complexity. So what you're saying is basically, does he have a reverse Wayne Rooney effect where he didn't start playing for that long? He might not have that many miles on him. If he takes really good care of himself, like we've seen Salah do, like he might have a lot more miles in the future. I kind of laughed because like, you know, you've got Salah on one side, you've got Mito on the other side. Like one of them seems like they could play forever. The other one was like, yeah, I've had a good time. I've had enough. Which one is Marmoush? You know, you're making a good case here that he might have like a long career and that somebody could be comfortable with a 5-year deal on.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. So should we talk about fit for teams? Because Arsenal doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, like if they want him as a pure centre forward, they could try it. I guess they could say, right, we want to turn you into a left winger. To be clear, he's been playing in a front two, right, with Ugo Ekitike, who also is
who's also really good.
Yeah, he's a player people should be interested in. 22-year-old, big forward, like really nice on the ball. His expected goal numbers are crazy this season. Love that player. But Marmoush, I wouldn't really expect him to be a huge He does do a lot of ball carrying, but I wouldn't expect him to be a huge dribbling threat in the Premier League because his success rate is not particularly high. He carries the ball into the box a lot, but I don't know. I see much more value in touches in the box and him getting fouled a ton than the dribbles he's completing in the Bundesliga.
So let's do this in a different way. Let's do this in the Liverpool style, where you're looking at the future. You're not looking at current constraints, but you're looking at what's possible and look at it from that way. So we're not looking at this window or the next 6 months. We're looking at the next 5 years and sort of the incomings and outgoings that have there. He's real interesting for Arsenal in that way. Like if you figured Jesus is going to go somewhere at some point, and you know that Arsenal kind of need a real center forward, and they love to have guys that can go fast, right? And especially a second guy that can go fast alongside of like Martinelli on one side, or if and when Saka comes back, like that's a real sort of dangerous three-prong there. Maybe they eventually get a Martinelli. Maybe they just live with what they've got right now. Maybe they're okay with like Trossard as a sort of tortoise-shaped inside forward as he ages out a bit. I think that's really interesting. I think Chelsea have no space whatsoever. I think City have lots of spaces. You know, and actually, I think that's kind of interesting. Like a big man, little man with Haaland and Marmoush is like pretty attractive. Now, I'm not sure Pep has ever consistently played with like an inside tucked wing because it doesn't work defensively for him. So like that would be a huge adjustment tactically if that was the case. It looks like Villa are not going to do this. They've got Donyell Malen coming in. Maybe they've been worried about Leon Bailey, stuff like that. We'll talk about Donyell in a minute. Who else we got? So actually, that's the obvious one too. Like if you took United, you wiped out everything they've got right now.
Yeah.
And you said, what sort of shape do they need and who could play in a 3-5-2? Like, yeah, this is it.
Yeah, and they're so lacking in like top end speed. Like if you had Diallo and Garnacho and Marmoush in there, then suddenly you'd be a lot scarier, especially if you can get some wingbacks who can actually run.
Even a Xerxes and Marmoush would make sense together, right? You got a big man that has some pretty good touch and can actually pass and keep his side up. And you have somebody that can meep all over the place and run under through balls and stuff like that. Now, obviously, they have to rejig the midfield. Ugarte had an awesome pass. It's like, we never see that type of thing from him in the Liverpool game. But yeah, so looking at the breadth of the Premier League on those who could afford him, like there's a lot of confusion around it. City are a fairly obvious win, but tactically is a big question. The other ones are currently who has need. But if we wipe out the immediate need and we say the next sort of 12, 18, 24 months, then you start to see the shape of some potential moves anyway.
Yeah, and the price. I mean, like the rumors back in the summer were kind of 40, 50, maybe edging 60. Now they're kind of talking 80 million euros, which is like, they're not pricing him out of a move with that money in January. I don't think. Like it's quite feasible that they could get close to that.
I think £50 million with some bonuses is an easily doable one. Like once you get up to 60, that age starts to bite a little bit. Like you want to have more clauses, right? And so that's why you could do a deal where you're going to get a really nice base, like say 50 million euros, and you have 20 million in clauses that can get hit, and that kind of gets the in between of that deal done.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would love to see him in the Premier League. It'd be very interesting because these kind of fast, like super fast guys who get tons of shots are always fun to see in the Premier League. And the fact that he does get tons of shots, and it's not like there's that genre of Bundesliga forward who gets kind of 2 shots a game, but the expected goals per shot are absolutely bananas. I hate that kind of forward. That kind of forward like never works to me in the Prem.
It's so inconsistent because they just don't get the chances. Like the defenses are so much better.
So we will see. I like him. I like him for City. I'd be interested to see Pep just do something totally new. And somebody else needs to shoot at Manchester City. Like that is, to put it simply, like one thing that they need. So maybe Omar Marmoush will happen. You mentioned him there. Should we move on to Donyell Malen, who does look like it's happening, has happened, it's in the process of happening, on his way to Aston Villa.
Such a weird deja vu element of this, because like I feel like this move should have happened as the move that he actually took in Dortmund. Like everybody knew about him.
Mm.
Everybody kind of wanted him, but I think that maybe they gave him a really good deal. They also, so for those of you who don't know Donyell Malen, he was a Eredivisie wonder kid, came out of PSV, and people were very, very well aware of him. That last season that he was there, I think he played mostly on the right, but also across the forward set off and on. Actually, not on the right. He played on the left that time, but he can play across the set of space there. The way I would describe him is like a high volume, mostly scoring forward. And that is kind of what Dortmund thought they were buying. And it took him a bit of time to kind of get up to speed in the Bundesliga. But last year he had 13 goals with a Dortmund team that was very up and down. So people have known about him for a long time. It felt like everyone was waiting for him to kick on into the elite or to kind of disappear. And he's only been good.
Yeah.
which isn't a bad thing necessarily. He's been fine. But I think we're also seeing a thing where like Villa are willing buyers for players that are no longer potential players so much. They're players that they feel like there might be some discount on. Like they don't have to worry too much about the future potential of them. They spend like crazy. Like Villa have that's like a Swiss Ramble future column or past column. You're like, how are they really doing this legally? But my question on Villa is like, how do you fit him into like a very busy squad? Who's going out? Do you have PSR moves that are coming in January to like help things out in the summertime? I'm not sure. Maybe PSR just is going to change again and won't be relevant. Malen is fine. He's pretty good. I don't really care. It's not a bad move. It just fits with like the rest of their squad, and they're kind of something that hasn't really come into shape this year as being excellent outside of maybe a decent Champions League run.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really drastically change their prospects. I agree with that. I like the move. Like the rumored fees have been anything from kind of 15 to 30 million. At 30 million, I don't like it as much. At 15, I would kind of love it. Like that's really good. He turns 26 next week.
He's very clearly been agitating for a move, which I think also makes sense because I think that he got promised that, hey, come here for a couple of years, do well, we'll get you a move. He probably was expecting a move in the summertime and it didn't happen. He's like, look, this is my time. Like, and also I'm in peak, like, let me get a new deal on this moment. And this is now. He's got this one more year. So it does make sense. He's probably pretty happy to be playing for a Champions League club again. So like it doesn't feel like he's really gone down. We'll see if, Villa are Champions League club next year. And I imagine the wages are not obscene. I imagine the wages are for Premier League anyway, pretty reasonable.
And his numbers, his whole career have been good. His expected goal numbers are good. He gets shots very reliably. He doesn't do that much other stuff. Like he's an okay passer. I don't think he's going to be a plus dribbler in the Premier League, though he has been at points, at other times in his career. I just don't think it's going to continue.
You can kind of hear us trying to get excited about like a 75th percentile player. and the thing is, it's not a bad thing. It's fine.
But the thing is about Donyell Malen is like, I've already been excited about this guy when he was like 17, and now I can't do it again. He came to Arsenal, he was in the Arsenal academy for a year or two. I think at the same time as Ismail Benacer, who obviously who was another player I really liked who went on to AC Milan. And look, Malen still does have abilities. Like he's a right footer who, even when he plays on the right, is still a goal threat, which I think is valuable. Obviously,
his versatility has real value across that Villa space as well. So I think that's good. I think it's a bit like Leon Bailey or a number of Villa transfers that have happened even over the last 5-6 years. Like El Ghazi was one as well. You're like, oh, this kid's sort of already peaked. Like, what is going to happen? Like, what should we really expect? And they've all just been sort of fine servants, but nothing that ended up being special at any point.
Yeah, it would have been more fun to see Malen go somewhere like Brentford or something, where they're like, hey, you're not like a real centre forward, but you're also not a winger. That doesn't matter. You're going to score loads of goals. I think that would have been a lot of fun. But he's a good part for Villa. I think this is sensible money, which has not historically been, Villa's forte. And yeah, 29 goal involvements in 39 90s over the last 2 league seasons. Pretty good on a pretty shitty Dortmund side. So like the player, don't really care. Who have we got next?
But we have a player whose name I can't pronounce and whose name you decided to give an entire treatise on the potential ways to pronounce it in the B-roll today. But you want to explain like where this one came from?
Okay, so this is one of those transfers where like sometimes a name pops up in the English press, and normally one of the ways I gauge whether it's potentially real is I think, is there any chance that a football journalist at like the Mail has heard of this player if he hasn't been told it by somebody at the club? And this guy absolutely fits into there. It's Abdulkadir Khosanov, who's an Uzbek centre-back. He's a 20-year-old Uzbek centre-back. He plays for Lens, and he's been linked with Manchester City. Manchester City been linked to kind of everybody, but a 20-year-old defender who has played kind of I think he's got 20 career league starts in Ligue 1. So when people were saying Manchester City target centre-back signing to get their season back on track, I was kind of like, guys,
it doesn't fit like that. That's definitely not the way. Case.
But Lens have a good defense. You know, they're the second best in France by goals conceded, but they're more like fifth best kind of by expected goals. He's a right-footed defender. He's very, very fast. This is the exciting thing about him. He's very, very fast. And so the question here is, would he be a centre-back? Would he be a walker? You know, kind of like...
I can just imagine backstop. That the way that particular transfer concept happened there. Like, how did that scouting process happen? Well, find us a replacement for Kyle Walker in terms of speed, and then find us the least bad option that we can put in front of Pep in terms of like technical ability, right? Sure. These are the two options. And we know historically that Pep kind of hates new center backs unless like he knows them really well. So like I'm curious like how this betting in process would go. But also knowing that Kyle Walker has sort of downshifted into the slow lane, like cannot go past 60 miles an hour anymore. They certainly have massive need for somebody pacey that can clean up mistakes from the high press. The people that they currently have doing that seem to only be able to create penalties for the most part when they do come do the cleanup work. I thought Antonio Silva would be a long-term City choice, and he's been agitating for a move as well, but he doesn't have that pace. He has the physical ability. He looks excellent on set pieces as well, and he's the type of passer that I think is super exciting. We previewed him a bit in the summertime, and I thought he was the most exciting center back prospect that I watched. He's at Benfica. Benfica, you know, historically are great at selling. He's only got 7.6 90s per played, and I had heard some rumors that he was frustrated about a potential move, which means that like now might be a good time to go grab him if you could get on a reasonable, you know, deal versus what you would have seen in the summertime. Malik Tia was one that was also rumored in the summertime. Much faster pace, but his head kind of he's a little more rash, I think, than Pep would tolerate. So what you're seeing here effectively is City trying to find some, and I bet they'll do it kind of multi-tiered in that they're like, all right, we need to rebuild the defense. We need these 3-4 traits. We also need these types of attackers. And then we need some health. Obviously, we have a Rodri shape hold. Everybody knows about the Rodri shape hold. That's the hardest thing to fill because Rodri did so many things. And the problem is like he probably will come back next year and be pretty good anyway. So how do we rebuild this with 3 to 4 transfers right now? And then maybe 1 or 2 in the summertime with some incomings and outgoings that they've already got rocking there. I'm curious about it because it's a hard, people never feel bad for City, but it's actually a hard set of stuff that you've got to do in replacing players that have been awesome for a very long time and they let them age for a little bit too long and now they're struggling. They have 2 wins in a row, but this weekend was not really a resounding success. Like expected goals were about the same. They got outshot by a lot, which is unusual as well. So
their last 2 games, I've kind of checked in at half time. And this one, I was just like, we're edging Lopetegui's West Ham at home, who, like, look, they suck shit. They're terrible. I'm not super convinced by it, but yeah, two wins, they'll rocket back up the table, I'm sure. Like this guy, the thing is, when we're talking about giving penalties away, like this guy's a super active defender. He's 20. He's 20. So he dives into challenges. He does commit a lot of fouls. He's super aggressive. Like, he's tackling all the time. Like, he's that kind of defender. He's very good in the air. He is very good in the air. I'll give him that as well. And his passing looks fine.
Salib is the only kid defender that I ever saw that I'm not ever, but like the only kid defender in recent times where I was like, man, he just does not make mistakes as a child. And that's one reason why I thought like Arteta may have screwed up, like, and cost Arsenal some placement points in the league table by letting him go a year extra. This is not that level of transfer, I don't think, but they're doing their best to find what's available. Who else do we had sort of some internal discussion that I'm seeing. So basically I was talking to some people in the industry and I was like, what are you seeing in January? Because like it's kind of weird. Like I'm surprised by the slowness of moves for teams that actually already have needs. Like I thought some of these teams would have just been like, yeah, get him in on the first, like let's run. It might be that team personnel were not in the office in order to get those deals executed, which occasionally happens in the holidays. But I think one of the trends that we're seeing right now is Footy Biz had a thing about it today. I was already aware of it from discussions over the weekend, which is basically that we don't know what teams should be pricing players at right now. And the reason why is because we are in the first time period where we're starting to see the league deals go down on the television front. And television fees are the thing that pays for basically 75, 80%, in some cases more, of most of the transfer fees and the wage fees and everything like that. And historically, they've gone up by 300, 400%, just in still the last decade until this last cycle of renewals, where most of the leagues have seen their TV revenue go down. Premier League did not, because they sold more games, so they kept the domestic deal the same, and then the international rights continued to go up a little bit, but they've pretty much peaked as well, which means all around the world except for women's football, we are seeing revenues go down. And because of that, people don't know what the prices should look like, partly because the ownership stakes are also totally different. Now, this is slightly detailed, but I figure that our podcast audience is nerdy enough that they like the shit, because it means it has a big impact on transfer fees. But if there are fewer owners that want to come into the game and buy teams and fund losses, that means that the whole structure of how football teams have existed for 20 years now has to change, because otherwise they'll either go out of business because they've been running these huge losses, they have these huge debts, they can't find somebody else to pick it up again, or players who get by far the lion's share of money. Like, we always happy to say, hey, it's great that they're getting the bag. But if owners finally lock down the amount of money, or if La Liga or the leagues start to really put in like legitimate financial controls that teams have to pay attention to, one, that means that finally, like the acceleration of money is going differently. And two, if you want to buy a player, you don't know what they should cost anymore, because like this whole cycle is gone. My guess is, off of the peaks, we've already seen things start to come back down. I had huge arguments back when the Neymar and Mbappe deals happened that like, hey, this is not reality. Like this is way. Usman and Dembele was another one. We're probably at 50% of those deals. Like, the peak deals are going to be 80 to 100 million. That's 80 to 100, not 100 to 110, but 80 to 100. And then like your average deals are going to look like this Marmoush deal, which is sort of 50 plus clauses. I think that's for the very good players. I think that's more what it looks like. You'll see occasional spikes above that, but for a long time we saw these really big numbers, and everybody's like, oh, it's just going to go up. Numbers go up, money goes up. It doesn't go up anymore, and that makes it hard for teams to figure out if they want to sell. And it also means there's a big gap in the market between this is what we expect, this is this trend line that's been going this way, and teams like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense anymore, so we're not doing that.
So if we see that trend kind of come in across, the top end of football, who do you think benefits from it and who do you think suffers?
It depends on if financial controls come in. If financial controls come in, basically it forces everybody to play correctly. It means that some of the teams that have been bought by owners that want to spend, like, no longer can. Like, it doesn't make any sense that Newcastle is hitting PSR stuff, because we know that their owners have infinite money. And so like you're like, this is weird. Villa clearly have been happy to spend, like Chelsea have been happy to spend. Now Chelsea have huge revenues off of the back of this, and like, you know, huge amounts of players. They can kind of create this financial accounting stuff, but they really haven't paid that much attention to it. So it feels like if PSR were real, like they would be in trouble this year and next. We still don't know how real it might be. We know that there'll be legal fights. A little bit, I think, depends on how soundly City end up being punished, and whether teams feel like that's a sustainable way to do things or not. But again, teams that decided that these things didn't matter in La Liga have gotten absolutely axe murdered. Mostly this team being Barcelona.
Well, it couldn't happen to a team who deserve it more. And it's just annoying they've been bailed out by their incredible academy. It's so frustrating.
So when coming back to the Premier League teams know this. So when they're dealing with externals, so we saw it in the summertime, actually, like players that I looked at that I thought would be 30 million deals were going for like 15 to 20. And that's because the rest of the leagues are treating this as if it's real. Like they understand it. And so when they deal with each other, as long as the Premier League is not involved, like there's no premium on it. There's like a 30% premium on Premier League deals right now. Inside the Premier League, there's also this element of, well, yeah, so you know, we need to be a little careful on what we spend because we know that like money, the numbers don't go up anymore. So someone like an Mbomo, who we've seen sort of in the rumor mill, or a Yohan Wissa as well. Both Brentford ones. Brentford I mentioned because they're comfortably mid-table. They could happily sell right now. They're not worried about it. They're not relegation candidates. They're not Premier League or Champions League candidates or Europe candidates or anything like that. So they can be happy sellers and then, you know, be able to redo their cycle in the summertime. But finding the right price there might be something that takes until the end of January, or as we've seen a number of times, maybe it doesn't happen even in January and it continues on into the summertime and you see some early deals happen then instead. There's also the same problem with the players that are looking on their Bosmans. So they can negotiate right now with teams that if they want to. And usually you'll hear, especially in Germany, you'll hear the early Bosmans happen, and then someone would be like, "Oh no, it hasn't actually happened. Nobody actually announces it." And then it comes out to be exactly true, 4 or 5 months time when they're allowed to announce it. We haven't seen much of that or almost any of that yet. So I'm curious as to what's going to happen. There'll be some financial reckoning that is sticky here. I think the smart teams will be move early, sell aggressively if you can. That's probably the right set of moves.
Okay. So bring it back to the ownership side. How would this work though? Because as when you talk about, the way it's worked for years, obviously you could go in to a club, like you say, lose a bunch of money, but the club would continue to appreciate and you could sell it years down the road for more money. But the main problem for clubs is that the wage to turnover is kind of horrific pretty much across the sport. But how do you lower wages at this point? It feels like that's going to be incredibly hard to do, especially at a time when you're playing more games. And if anything, you need a broader squad.
You hope that
Great start.
Enough other owners are willing to make this reality and you bind each other's hands. And some people will complain about it, but if there's enough of you that have solidarity around the almighty dollar, as it were, then you can see this happen. And then you have to hope a second time that the EU doesn't kill something like that, which the courts could view this as a violation of potential earnings for individuals, which is always like a particularly fraught thing. Like the EU courts especially seem to be much more worker friendly than ones sort of in the United States, stuff like that. So those are the hopes that you have, or you just hope that everybody goes broke and basically like, yep, can't spend anymore. That's the case. I think the media loves to be able to champion how positive the player elements are, and they're like, oh yeah, players deserve this giant share. Well, that's sort of true. Like they only deserve the amount of share that it takes to keep these institutions, these glorious institutions that we talk about, continuing to run. And if player wages and the people that agreed to them and do dumb deals as a result of them are the things that cause them to go under, then that is a significant problem. And you and I are both sort of player friendly as well. So we're not really like arguing that players don't deserve what they're earning. Like they're unique individuals that have a set of skills that almost nobody replicates. But as a broader entity in football, like there has to be a stop, and the stop right now is very clear. Like this can no longer continue to accelerate. It has to decelerate, because look at it from a different perspective. If you're a business person, like one of the funky things about football teams is like, yes, they can have big revenues, but often they trade at 1 to 1.5x, which doesn't happen with like decent businesses. Even decent businesses that have some growth element will trade at anywhere to 3 to 6x, especially EBITDA and stuff like that. And then football teams can earn money. They don't like to pay taxes, whatever. But when you've got loss-making entities and you know the revenues in future years are going to go down, like that's even weirder. Like who even knows what those things should cost anymore? And that's also why we see so few businesses transacting right now. There are people that wanted to get involved in the consulting of buying and selling these clubs, but there just isn't enough volume to be able to do it. So I think that over the next few years, like, yeah, player wages have basically peaked. You're not going to see a continued acceleration of this. There's a huge disparity between what players cost if they go to the Premier League and what if they don't. And we haven't seen all that shake out, but I think most teams are not smart enough to figure out which way this trending is going to go.
Mm-hmm. And so we can expect to maybe see some of the smarter kind of clubs around Europe, maybe as bellwethers on this, see if they start to try and sell aggressively like you were talking about.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think anytime that you can find a way to get into the Premier League and get that premium, like that's really good as well. So like anytime you can get some shop windows, some teams actually could potentially want to loan some of their academy kids into championship teams to be able to get into the shop window. But there's difficulties around that potentiality because of the work permit reasons and the fact that Brexit happened. But yes, like anytime that teams who have a generation of players that they're able to replicate, and then they want to sell on a regular basis, they've got to figure out the selling side of it much more than the buying side of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, in a way, it's kind of linked to some of the stuff we've talked about there, which is an academy player from Liverpool in the Championship, in the shop window. Doak has been at Middlesbrough this season, is at Middlesbrough this season. And now Palace and Ipswich have both made bids for him, apparently in the region of about 15 mil. Liverpool supposedly want 30 mil. He's 19 years old. He's a right winger. And he's looked pretty good this season. He's not looking like astonishing on the goals and assist numbers, but there's loads and loads and loads of stuff here to love, right?
19 years old, doing what he's doing right now, super positive. You should be excited about it. In the same way that you'd be excited about Tyler Dibbling, right? Like he's doing it against real men. Championship's a hugely competitive league. In fact, like a lot of times you kind of trust championship stats more than you can even trust like some of the bigger European teams because they're not as skewed. Like they might play in better leagues, quote unquote, that have Champions League teams in them, but then the bottom half of that league is like garbage. And so the championship teams as opposed to Champions League teams, like you're playing with mostly PKH teams that are, trying to get the most valuable promotion in the world. If he's doing that at age 19, and he is quite good, and Borough are a pretty good team too, yeah, you should be stoked about it, or doked about it, as it were.
Oof, boy, oh boy. Yeah, I mean, like, what do you... If you were going to give people a comparison, people who haven't really seen him play much, because I was looking at some of his numbers, I mean, he's getting tons of touches in the box, expected assists really good. He's carrying the ball into the penalty area relentlessly. He's constantly taking the ball into the penalty area. Like, genuinely, I looked at this and his numbers for these things are some of the highest I've ever seen.
Yeah. I don't think Liverpool should sell, but...
That's why I wanted to ask. You think he could be a Liverpool player?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that's... I think if Liverpool did sell, like the really grumpy element about it would effectively be, what sort of buyback do they want? Like, are they going to maintain strings on this? And when I was doing this stuff, like we would never allow strings because it capped our upside, right? So if we're bothering to buy the player for real, like that's not the case. Maybe they do like a 2-year loan somewhere good. That's good developmental. Like maybe his next loan, like maybe they keep him, give him a new deal, and his next loan is like Bundesliga. And send him to the Bundesliga for 2 years on some developmental place, or in Spain, La Liga as well. You've seen some of those ones where like teams will get a % of future sell-on fees from this player for simply loaning him and playing him X amount of time. That's the way that it looks, because Liverpool, again, his foot matters. Like which footedness you are matters. His comfort in and around the box on the ball against real men is a big deal too. So I hesitate to think, and teams are very interested in him. Like they know about him, they know he's good. They would love to get, make that leap. 15 million is definitely not enough. The question is like, what is the price to pry him out that doesn't have strings attached? And Liverpool are one of the most frustrating to deal with to get those deals done.
Yeah, the rumor was 30 mil, which even then for a 19-year-old playing in the Championship feels too reasonable.
30 is a lot though, like just for a pure spunk. But like, I think Wharton is probably another one that people looked at, and he immediately slotted into the English national team, right? So like these things can happen very, very quickly, especially for low supply players, and that left-sided wide forward / midfielder that's creative as opposed to pure goal scoring. Like that's a pretty unusual one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I would like to see Ben Doak in the Premier League. Maybe we will see that in the near future. It's just a question as to which shirt he wears.
He's not English, though, by the way. He's Scottish, right? Just I know the comments are going to get grumpy with me on that one. I wasn't implying that he was English. Like, just settle down, lads. It's all right. We're still here.
Do you want to talk about the Liverpool game before we get out of here? It was pretty fun.
It was fun. The first half, second half variation was significant. There were two fantastic goals. The Lissandro goal was whoa. And then obviously the Gakpo goal was pretty good. Not quite the mirror, a little more touch, a little less. Just killed the ball into the roof of that. I think the tendency of particularly Manchester media and those who are in the mainstream that are Manchester United former players to emphasize anything positive right now is pretty significant. The first half, I think this was a moderately controlled game. Both teams were quite good. You might even say that United shaded it, depending on how you looked at the game. Second half was not close. There was a penalty, obviously. The penalty was dumb. In fact, I wasn't even sure they would call it. Like that feels like yeah. I felt it might have been harsh, and I bet on this game. Like I had an obscenely good weekend in the gambling space. For those of you who aren't following variance betting, like we had a +6 this weekend. That's like really good. But yeah, I think that this was the first time in quite a while that people could look at United playing a Liverpool team and be like, yeah, okay, we mostly had good chances on that. We had some really nice plays and we had individual moments of brilliance, and we didn't completely shit the bed for the rest of the game. So like, yeah, that's a nice little positive. Don't oversell it as saying like they definitely deserve to win or anything, because that wasn't the case. But
yeah, that's the thing. I had a look at your roundup before we came on here, and I kind of compared it to my notes for this episode, and I had a lot of similar stuff. There was a real overreaction at the end of the first half about how United deserved this, and then at the end of the game they deserved that, and they could have won with Maguire at the death, which they actually could have done, but it was still not a particularly close game by the underlying numbers. I think I'm not saying they deserved to lose or anything. Like, you deserved that what you get. They didn't score their goals and you scored yours, and that's how it goes. But see it as good, positive progress. You went to Anfield, played well, pressed really aggressively, actually pressed more aggressively than Liverpool, and you come away with a point. Maybe don't see it as we can go toe to toe with all the big clubs away. I would not get too carried away.
If we just had a better mentality, we would be able to play like this every single game against the rest of the league. I'm like, I'm not even sure that that's true either. But again, just the big thing about United right now is it's a lot of mismatched toys into a system that will actually end up being pretty good, I think. And also the fact that it's a little bit unique is going to make it tough for teams to match up against them as well. But they still have at least 2 more transfer windows that they need to sort of swap players in and out. We have actually been weirdly positive about United recently as well. I don't feel like we need to be a lot more positive. Like, in fact, this feels a little uncomfortable for us. Maybe we should talk about Brentford.
Yeah.
5-0 away win. Incredible. and it was just so easy. Like all those goals were so easy. I do wonder if you take Mbumo and Wissa out of that system, like what would they look like elsewhere? Because like so many times they are very direct, and
Mm.
there's like one or two passes, zoom zoom, and can we get in on goal? Like that. That looks like it's a lot of the tactical style of Thomas Frank. Is it going to be missing with somebody else? Do they have other skills that they aren't able to show there? That's really intriguing as well. But yeah, so first time all season, Brentford basically went away and played it like a home match and scored 5 goals. Impressive
Mm.
work.
It's not dissimilar from the way that the Liverpool game went in some ways, in that it's teams trying to maximize the number of transition opportunities in games, right? Like it's very similar kind of mindset.
You don't see that constantly in when you watch the game sort of as a whole because they're less frequent. But once you start to really condense the highlights down, if you were to watch every set of highlights from the league over and over again this season, like you just see a lot of transition football. Now, not all of it, and some teams are able to create mini transitions, so they can transition from second third into final third, and then get the space. Like I think we're seeing some pretty nice elements of that. But yes, the best teams are constantly trying to create those moments because they want to face unset defenses. This year feels like the year of transition as well as the year of set pieces for the teams that are switched on. And then plenty of other ones are kind of struggling through the middle of this. Speaking of struggling, Crystal Palace 1-1 against that blue club.
The mighty Chelsea.
Mm.
Yeah, their title challenge hasn't gone as well as I think they were hoping it would. It's pretty funny. I don't really have any feelings about Chelsea, though I did see that Fofana might be out for the rest of the season
So
again.
they've really struggled without their two center backs. Not that they don't own like 8. And in fact, this is a very funny post match comment by Glasner around a potential recall of Trevor Chalobah, who has been one of the anchor points alongside Gahey in a back 3 that has really helped them perform much better. Like they finally have solidified their defensive output and they're able to create stuff. And Edsa coming back also helps them too. But I need to say something nice about Chelsea. They really did control this game quite well. They had one goal that was beautiful, basically created almost entirely by himself by Jadon Sancho. They had both teams had a lot of narrow angle shots that looked a lot closer, and then they just sort of missed. Those happen all the time, which is why those narrow angle shots are not very valuable. Like the goalkeeper covers the vast majority of space. Over here, you've got a goalkeeper. He's very wide. They tend to be, 6'3", 6'4", huge wingspans. And so those wide angle shots are tough to score on. They look so close. It used to be like the long range shots that would just go over the bar over and over again, right? And then when you aggregate all those long range shots that just go over the bar, you're like, oh, they scored 2 in 100 of them. So like, maybe they aren't actually good chances. But yeah, I actually thought Chelsea did a pretty good job of controlling this game right up until the goal that they gave away, which happened not because Palmer necessarily made a bad play and a giveaway. He got stuck in a pressing trigger double team, and then they stole it, and then they broke back the other way. And the reason why he did that is something that happened so many times this year, which is Sanchez put him in a spot where that player could not succeed. I cannot believe that they keep putting him out there. I don't understand it.
If he was the only goalkeeper they have, you could understand it. But Chelsea fans are furious with him as well, and they've tried all sorts of things in other positions. They've used like Disasi at right back when they had fit right backs, but this is the one area where we cannot possibly imagine a world other than the terrible one that we have.
I genuinely don't get it. I don't understand like what sort of folder he has on Maresca, and I mean, we could go down a huge. Never mind. I'm going to get us in trouble here, so I'm going to back slowly away from that one. But there has to be something that doesn't add up that we don't know about, that no one has talked about, because they do these insane contortions to do build-up play, and it's been this way for 19, 20 games now.
Yeah.
Their team's better than this. They should actually be running these teams out of the park, but because they have to do so much work for just a little bit of build-up play because their goalkeeper cannot make passing choices, they end up sort of barfing away points somewhat regularly. And And again, like this is me saying nice things about all the rest of the performance, and ended up in a spot where you're like, they have 9 goalkeepers. As Glasner was saying, they have how many center backs do they need? They have at least 6 on on their team. Do they need 8? Like, are they going to take Trevor back? I don't know.
Look, well, I'm going to continue to enjoy Chelsea being all over the shop right now. I'm kind of glad that they haven't managed to get it together in this one key position. Thank God.
Arsenal are kind of lucky they haven't managed to get it together yet.
I know, man. Arsenal also pretty miserable this weekend. Played like their best player was missing. Played like everybody else was sick. Not good stuff. Going to be a bit of a grind for them, I think, over the next couple of months. But
the FA Cup is coming. Play the children. Don't need to play in these cup competitions except for the Champions League. That's my advice for most of these teams, right? You guys are fucking desperately tired outside of a couple of clubs. Take a break, because you immediately have a midweek after the FA Cup, which also is not something that normally happens. I hate this new schedule. This new schedule sucks.
Yeah, it does suck. Okay, but it's good for us. It's good for the content. And if you have ideas for our content, if you see a transfer that you're interested in, if you have a player or a manager or a club that you'd like us to cover in a bit more detail, then let us know in the comments below. Thank you very, very much for watching or listening to us today. If you are watching on YouTube, please do like and subscribe to the channel. You can also leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app if you're that kind of person. And make sure that you follow us on social media, that you're signed up for the newsletter, Ted's Gambling. I don't know.
I feel like we always leave Easter eggs at the end for the people that stick around. So this week, we're on Friday for everybody. I'm going to produce a little column to kind of do a lot of roundup of my first half season statistics on the gambling side of it. So we'll tuck into that. And then next week, we have, as we get back into the Premier League, we have some big announcements and some new promotions and some new things that are happening that are focused mostly around variance betting, but also for the public. So on the YouTube side, we've got a new fun way to follow along there. But then people have asked for a really long time, how do I get involved in discount books? How do I find the lines that you're betting? And so we're going to have kind of a big blowout announcement around that in the coming weeks as well. So if you're interested in the gambling side, and it's totally fine if you're not, like, it's cool. Like, but if you're interested in it, we've got some good stuff coming for you. Been waiting until after the Christmas break to do it, but it's ready now.
Great, exciting stuff. And I do think that, I'm a person who's not really got any history in sports betting, but I do find all the gambling content to be enlightening just for how I'm thinking about the game generally. I think that
FPL people seem to love it.
Yeah,
which I've been surprised. Like, they're like, yeah, I'm like way better this year because you guys are so switched on, even if you're not doing FPL content. So
cool. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We will catch you on Wednesday. I'll be back with Ravi Ramaneni, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
You have like an actual name I've never heard on the city list, I believe, which is always fun. You have a center back, don't you?
Yeah. This is like all over the place. This guy, like, he's Uzbek. He's called Abdulkadir. I assume it's like Khosanov. I'm guessing.
Keep all the versions of his pronunciation. In fact, like, you need a super clip of the pronunciation of this guy.
It's difficult, right? Because it's like, I don't know. KH like that to me is normally like an aspirant, right? Like especially in Central Asia. Like, I know this is like Russian Central Asia, but like, okay, I'm not going to get into this. But
no, please. Like, we're wrapped. Come on.
Okay, yeah, but you see it in like, you obviously see it in like Farsi and in Arabic, right? But you also see it in like Greek and therefore in like some Russian too. Like some Russian pronunciations, right? Where you get this
random players trying to leave Napoli.
Yeah, basically, like Napoli is like the place you go when you're stateless. Like, like at the beginning of
the mafia is their own law there.
Yeah,
therefore it seems appropriate.
It's like, in the beginning of Casablanca, they're like, Lisbon. Everybody's going to Lisbon so they can head to the new world. Like that's what Napoli is kind of like.